Good morning, class. So today we're going to be learning about the debate and the adoption of the Constitution. And what I mean by this is we're going to see what kind of debate and what kind of differences people had before the adoption of the Constitution, so before we ratified it. So we're going to begin with this question. Do you think everyone, and I mean everyone, will agree on the Constitution? So, in other words, do you think it's going to get ratified, by the way? Or do you think that there's going to be some type of debate? And I don't want you to just answer yes or no. Tell me why. Why do you think that there's going to be debate before the ratification of the Constitution? So, now we're going to begin. So, before the Constitution goes into effect, 9 states had to ratify it. So that means 9 out of the 13 states that we had to approve the Constitution. But just like we do in everyday life, over Facebook, over Twitter, over Instagram, we have different opinions on things happening, in the news. We have different opinions on people being elected. We have different opinions about policies being passed. So the same thing happened during the debate and adoption of the Constitution. Instead of passing it right away, two groups, well, not just two groups, but people debated about it. They shared their opinions, they shared their political ideals. They argued for the Constitution and against the Constitution in different ways, such as the newspaper or meetings or everyday conversations. Again, just like we do today. So, two of the main groups that debated about the ratification of the Constitution were the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So now these two groups had very different opinions, and we're going to learn why. So first, we're going to discuss the Federalists. And the Federalists were people who supported the Constitution. They felt that, this document was strong enough and good enough to pass and basically be the way we govern our country. They picked the name Federalist to stress the idea that the Constitution was going to create a system of federalism, which meant powers are shared between the national government and states. So, some of the people that were Federalists and some of the famous people that were Federalists were George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Hamilton like the play, the musical, and John Jay. And in three of these men, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, actually wrote papers and essays supporting the Constitution. And eventually, all these papers and essays were published and they became what's called the Federalist Papers. And in these papers, we're going to see things such as arguments for the Constitution and why it's such a great document. So, things such as the implied powers of the government, limits of powers on the government, and things such as those. Now, so like I said, not everyone agreed on the Constitution. We had another group called Anti-Federalists, and they were a group who opposed the Constitution. This means that they were against the Constitution. And some of the reasons why they were against the Constitution because they felt that this Constitution would give the national government too much power and not enough power to the states and to the people. And since we had just finished fighting the American Revolution, they thought, well, what's the point of fighting in an American Revolution and getting our freedom if the Constitution is going to do the same, just create a strong national government? So, to defend their ideas and go against the Constitution, they wrote essays called the Anti-Federalist Papers. And some of the people that were Anti-Federalist were people such as Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, George Mason, and Thomas Jefferson. And one of the main arguments that happened between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists was that the Anti-Federalists believed that the Constitution should enumerate, and when I say enumerate, I mean list the the rights and freedoms of people. They wanted to see on paper what kinds of freedoms we as citizens of the new nation had. And Federalists believe like, no, the Constitution, it's good enough. It kind of implies that we have these rights. We don't need to write them down. But so this back and forth was just an argument about the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights we're going to learn about later. The Bill of Rights lists our powers, basically. And this is what the Anti-Federalists wanted and what Federalists thought could be dangerous. So now that we learned a little bit about the differences of these two groups, we're going to have an activity. And this activity is called Who Said It? So we're going to see a few quotes and we're going to try to decipher who said it. Who do we think said it? We're going to look at the quote as a whole. So we're going to read it out loud and we're going to do a few things. I'm going to give you guys a graphic organizer, and the graphic organizer is going to have the quote at the top. So first we're going to guess who said it, a Federalist or an Anti-Federalist. And if you think a Federalist said that, you're going to move to this side of the room. And if you think an Anti-Federalist said that, you're going to move to this side of the room. And we're not just going to write down who said it. I want you guys to look at the quote and I want you to underline, or you can highlight or circle, key terms and phrases that give the quote away. Meaning, what key terms or what phrases or what in the quote says, so I think a Federalist said this, or an Anti-Federalist. Okay, do we have any questions? Is there any way I can clarify our activity? Okay, so it's going to be a group activity because we're going to move from side to side, but it's also going to be an individual activity because I want you guys to look at the quotes and again highlight key terms and phrases, and afterwards you can share with your neighbor what you think. So let's begin. The first quote: listing the rights of the people could be dangerous since those making the list could omit some rights. Now, when we say omit, it means leave out. So let's reread this quote. Listing the rights of the people could be dangerous since those making the list could omit, leave out some rights. Now take some time. Who do you think said this? Federalist or Anti-Federalist? You guys can move in the room now. And now I want you guys to highlight key terms that you think give it away. So who do you think said this? A Federalist or an Anti-Federalist? Yeah, so a Federalist said this. And can you tell me why? Yes, so remember, Federalists said the Constitution is good enough. We don't have to include the rights. And that phrase, if we list those rights, it could omit some rights and be dangerous. It's them basically saying if we write them down, someone might forget a right and then we won't have any rights, right? So this is a reason why a Federalist said this. Now let's read the next quote. I'd rather be a free citizen of the small Republic of Massachusetts than an oppressed subject of the great American empire. Who do you think said this? A Federalist or an Anti-Federalist? Go ahead and move to your side. Okay, now in your graphic organizers, circle or highlight key terms or phrases that give this person away. Now, who do you guys think said this? A Federalist or an Anti-Federalist? And you're right, an Anti-Federalist said this. Can you tell me why? Yeah, so what this person is saying is that they'd rather be part of something small, a free citizen of a small republic, than something great like the American Empire, which might become too strong with this Constitution. Remember, Anti-Federalists said that the Constitution may make the government too strong and not give small states or any states enough rights and powers. So yes, an Anti-Federalist said this quote. Let's go to the next one. Any questions? The next quote. The national government is limited to only those powers granted to it. All power not delegated to it remain in the hands of the individual states. Now, when we say delegated, it means given to. So let's reread this. The national government is limited to only those powers granted to it. All powers not delegated to it remain in the hands of the individual states. Now, who do you think said this? A Federalist or an Anti-Federalist? Can you tell me why? What key terms and phrases did you circle or highlight? Yeah, so a Federalist said this, right? So when we reread the quote, we see national government is limited to only those powers granted to it. So Federalists believe that whatever rights were given or whatever powers were given to the national government, that's all they had. They could no longer take more powers. So anything, any duties and powers listed, as we'll see in Articles 1, 2, and 3, they couldn't overstep those boundaries and they couldn't overstep those duties. They had to do whatever was told and nothing more. And this is a strong point Federalists kept trying to, reinforce that idea that the government is limited and that Anti-Federalists should feel okay that the rest of the powers that are not on there. So one example is education. Education, the federal government cannot touch. So whatever requirements is needed for education, that's left to the states because it's not in the powers of the federal government. So it goes to the states right away, right? Let's look at the next quote. The rights of the people, such as freedom of assembly, speech, press, and religion, must be specifically enumerated. Now, when we say enumerated, again, this means listed. So let's reread the quote. The rights of the people, such as freedom of assembly, speech, press, and religion, must be specifically listed. Now, who do we think said this? A Federalist or an Anti-Federalist? Can you tell me why? Yeah, so remember, Anti-Federalists wanted a list. They wanted a list of everyone's freedoms and everyone's rights to be included in the Constitution. So things such as press and speech and religion, they wanted there in the Constitution. And this will be later known as the Bill of Rights. So now that we've finished, I want you guys to step into the shoes of a Federalist or an Anti-Federalist. And you're going to create a tweet, and I will provide the template. And in this tweet, I want you to argue like a Federalist or an Anti-Federalist so that people will like your tweet, retweet it, and basically garner attention and support. So remember, when you create this tweet, you can be creative, use hashtags like you normally would, but think like a Federalist or an Anti-Federalist. Think about what they might say, what they might argue, what kinds of opinions they might put out on Twitter. Also think about the differences. Maybe in your tweet, you can counteract what the other tweet says, right? So remember, just think like a Federalist, think like an Anti-Federalist, but get creative as well. Don't forget a hashtag.